The blind date was empty. Then the Mafia Boss's daughters walked in. "Are you our new mommy?" Elena Brooks, 35 years old and feeling every minute of it, sat alone in the Luna Diner. The corner spot in South Brooklyn smelled of stale coffee, bleach, and the faint, sweet aroma of frying onions. Outside, the dying neon sign cast weak, flickering strokes of pink and blue across the cold stainless steel tabletop, a reflection that mirrored the persistent chill deep inside her. She was ex-FBI, a specialist in financial crimes, a woman who used to hunt predators by following the intricate, invisible trails of money. Now, she just hunted for a convincing reason to have left her apartment on a Tuesday night. She was waiting on a blind date, her first in 5 years. 5 years. It felt like a different lifetime. 5 years since Mark, her husband, was murdered in a spray of bullets that the press had sensationally dubbed an assassination, and the Bureau had quietly filed away as an unsolved, high-level mystery. The psychological scars ran deeper than any blade could cut. They had kept her isolated, wary, a ghost haunting her own life, jumping at shadows and double-checking locks she already knew were secure. Her best friend, Clara, had been the one to push her back into the world, armed with cheerful, insistent logic. "You cannot let the bastards win. Elena, you are alive. You need to live. Just go. He's an architect. For God's sake, not everyone in New York is carrying a gun under their coat." Elena, looking at the empty seat across from her, was not so sure. The ancient grease-filmed clock above the Formica counter moved with agonizing slowness. Its hands clicked forward, measuring out the silence of the near-empty diner. Tick, tick, tick. She watched the long red minute hand crawl past the 8. 40 minutes. He was 40 minutes late. She was being stood up. A familiar, hollow feeling settled in her stomach. In a strange way, it was almost a relief. This, she understood. Disappointment was an old coat she knew how to wear. Being alone was safe. She had just pulled a $10 bill from her purse, the paper worn soft at the creases, ready to slap it on the table and retreat back to the locked-down safety of her empty apartment. That's when the bell above the diner door chimed, a bright, tinny sound that cut through the low hum of the coolers. A blast of cold November air swept inside, smelling of the river and distant exhaust. Elena looked up, bracing herself for the apologetic, flustered face of a late architect. Instead, 2 small children darted in, breaking free from the darkness of the street. They were twins, identical in a way that was almost unsettling, perhaps 6 or 7 years old. They were dressed in precise, matching outfits of black velvet and pristine white lace, clothes far too formal, too expensive, for a greasy spoon in South Brooklyn. They stopped dead center in the vinyl-tiled aisle, their movements sudden and synchronized, their eyes wide and dark like polished stones, scanned the room and then focused directly, intently, on her. One of them, the one on the left, tilted her head. "Are you our new mommy?" The question, delivered in a high, clear voice, struck Elena harder than a physical blow. It was a child's innocent query, yet it felt profoundly chilling, loaded with a history she could not comprehend. Before Elena could form a single word, before she could even breathe, the man they had run from filled the doorway. He didn't just enter the room, he consumed the space. The air pressure seemed to drop. He was tall, exceptionally so, and dressed in a long, black wool overcoat tailored with a precision that spoke of old money and absolute authority. His presence was a walking paradox, the elegance of a seasoned aristocrat mixed with the immediate, quiet danger of a panther. He moved with a fluid, controlled grace, his gaze sweeping the room once before locking onto hers. He wasn't the architect. He was something else entirely. He glided toward the booth, his footsteps silent on the linoleum. The girls, sensing him, immediately flanked him, each clutching a handful of the expensive fabric of his coat. "I apologize," he said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth but lined with gravel, heavy with an exhaustion that resonated deep in her own bones. "I am late." He looked at Elena, his eyes a dark, unreadable color in the diner's poor light. They held no apology, only assessment. He gestured slightly to the children. "I am Luca DeLoren, and these are my daughters, Gianna and Sophia." As he said his name, the wind howled outside, pressing against the plate glass windows. The fluorescent light directly above their table buzzed loudly and flickered, plunging them into a momentary, stark shadow before snapping back on, brighter than before. Elena's blood went cold. She knew that name. It wasn't a name from the society pages or architectural magazines. It was a name whispered in the dark. Classified Omega files she was never supposed to have seen. Files detailing encrypted networks, offshore holdings, and shipping manifests that vanished. Luca DeLoren, the silent, untouchable head of the DeLoren crime family, the man who held the entire East Coast in his grasp, the man whose operations her late husband had been peripherally, dangerously, investigating right before he died. Her training, her instincts, every nerve in her body screamed at her to run, to stand up, make an excuse, and walk out, but she was frozen, pinned by the weight of his gaze and the impossible hope in the eyes of his children. The air around the table, moments ago empty and sterile, was now charged with an electric tension. It was an impossible, volatile mix, the innocent warmth radiating from the two small girls staring at her as if she were the answer to a prayer, and the lethal, magnetic danger of the man watching her every breath. Elena Brooks did not know it then, sitting in the cheap booth under the flickering light, but her life, the one she had so carefully walled off from the world, had just ended. Love and darkness had just sat down at her table, and they were waiting for an answer. Luca DeLoren slid into the booth opposite her, an action that should have been awkward in the cramped space, but which he performed with a disquieting lack of effort. The two girls scrambled in beside him, one on either side, pressing against him like small anchors. They immediately grabbed the sugar packets from the metal dispenser and began organizing them into meticulous, silent rows. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the clinking of cheap porcelain from the kitchen and the quiet, focused shuffling of the sugar packets. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Her training screamed at her. Protocol, threat assessment, distance. She should have been halfway to her car. Instead, she was staring at the most powerful organized crime figure on the eastern seaboard. "They wanted pancakes," Lucas said, his voice pulling her from her internal spiral. He did not look at the menu. He was watching her, his gaze steady. Elena found her voice, though it felt thin. "It is late for pancakes." "They are very persuasive." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth, but it did not reach his eyes. His eyes were the most arresting part of him. They were not the cold, dead eyes of the sociopaths she had interviewed in sterile rooms. They were deep, shadowed, and held an undeniable weariness. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much and slept too little, a man who understood loss. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a pencil behind her ear, approached. She looked at Luca, then at the girls, and her professional demeanor softened. "What can I get for you folks?" Luca turned his attention to his daughters, his entire posture shifting, softening. "Gianna, Sophia, what do you say?" The girls spoke in unison, a rehearsed duet. "Chocolate chip pancakes, please." "And for your—" The waitress looked at Elena, trailing off. "Just coffee," Elena managed. "And I will have the same," Luca said, handing the menus back. Black. When the waitress left, the silence returned, heavier this time. Elena's mind was racing, trying to reconcile the man in the file, a phantom of illicit transactions and rumored violence, with the father sitting across from her, patiently watching his daughters build a fortress out of sugar. "You are not who I was expecting," Elena said, her voice firmer now. "Neither are you," Luca replied. He leaned back against the cracked vinyl. "My apologies. The architect, Mr. Harris, had a sudden scheduling conflict. I am an acquaintance. He asked me to meet you, to convey his regrets, and my daughters insisted on coming along. It was a lie. Elena knew it instantly. It was smooth, plausible. But his eyes shifted. Just for a moment. To the left, a classic tell. He was not a good liar, she thought. Or perhaps he just did not care enough to be one with her. He was a man used to giving statements, not having them questioned. "What is it you do, Mr. DeLorean?" she asked, testing the line. "I am in real estate," he said. This time, he held her gaze, but there was a tightness in his jaw. "I invest in properties, developments, rebuilding parts of the city." "Like the new harbor project?" she asked. A direct hit. The DeLorean family was rumored to control the unions, the shipping, everything. His expression did not change, but the temperature at the table dropped. Something like that. The pancakes arrived, a steaming platter that immediately captured the girls' full attention. As they ate, chattering quietly to each other about syrup distribution, the tension eased. It was their innocence, their simple, childish joy that created a small, strange bubble of normalcy in the diner. Elena watched them, and a familiar ache bloomed in her chest. It was the hollow space Mark had left, the one that echoed with the children they had planned to have, the life that had been stolen. As if sensing the shift in her mood, the girl named Sophia, or perhaps it was Gianna, she could not tell them apart, looked up at her, her face serious under a smear of chocolate. "If you stay, will Daddy stop being sad?" The question was a clean shot, straight to the heart. It bypassed every one of Elena's defenses. She saw her own grief reflected in the question. She saw this little girl's desperate attempt to fix the unfixable, to heal the central sadness in her world. Elena's throat tightened, and she could not look away. She felt Luca's gaze on her, sharp and sudden. He was not looking at his daughter. He was watching Elena's reaction. When she finally met his eyes, she saw a complex, dangerous mix of emotions, gratitude for her gentle expression toward his child, and a stark, cold assessment. He was weighing her, measuring her response. "You do not need to be afraid of me," Luca said, his voice pitched low. "For her alone." The diner's ambient noise seemed to fade. "I just want them to see that there are still good people in the world." It was a masterful line, part confession, part manipulation. It positioned him as a protector, a father trying to shield his children, while subtly acknowledging the darkness she already knew surrounded him. Elena gave a small, brittle laugh. Good people do not usually show up to blind dates for architects. His gaze intensified. No, but sometimes people who need help find each other. Her old FBI instincts, the ones that had kept her alive, were screaming. He was hiding something monumental. He was dangerous. He was using his children as a shield, and yet he was right. She did need help. She was drowning in her own past. When the meal was over, Luca paid in cash, leaving a $50 bill on the table for a $20 check. He did not wait for the change. He and the girls walked her to the door. The cold night air felt sharp on her warm skin. "It was a pleasure, Miss Brooks." "Elena," she said, not knowing why she was correcting him. "Elena." He tasted the name, his expression unreadable. As she walked to her own car, parked 2 blocks down, she felt his eyes on her back. She looked over her shoulder. His car was parked directly in front of the diner, a black, obscenely expensive sedan. The kind that was probably armored. 2 large men in dark suits stood beside it. They were not watching the street. They were watching her, assessing her, just as he had. She drove home, her hands shaking, her mind a war zone of conflicting signals. Later that night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to erase the image of his eyes, her phone vibrated on the nightstand. A new message from an unknown, blocked number. It was just one line. "Do not see him again. Luca DeLorean kills with a smile." Elena stared at the glowing white text. The message confirmed everything her brain was telling her. It was a warning from a ghost, perhaps even from her old life at the bureau. It was clear, simple, and meant to save her. But as she turned off the light, the only thing she could feel was the strange, unfamiliar flutter deep in her chest. It It was a terrifying, reckless sensation, one she had thought was buried with her husband. It was the first time she had felt anything other than grief or fear or numbness in 5 long years. Her heart was impossibly waking up. The next morning, Elena walked through the glass doors of the Jacob K. Javits Federal Building. The air inside was the same as she remembered, antiseptically clean, unnervingly quiet, and chilled to a perfect 68 degrees. It was the smell of authority, of cold facts and consequences. This place had been her entire life for 8 years. Now, walking its polished marble floors felt like visiting a graveyard. She was here to make it official. She took the elevator to the 23rd floor, to the Organized Crime Division. Her old supervisor, Agent Thorne, a man whose face looked carved from worn granite, was waiting for her by the bullpen. "Brooks," he said, not unkindly, "you're sure about this? You were one of the best." "I am sure, sir," Elena said. She held out the manila envelope. Inside was her formal resignation and, tucked in a separate pouch, her badge and firearm credentials. Thorne took the envelope, his expression betraying a brief flash of disappointment. "Your leave of absence is up. I was hoping you would come back. We could use you. This Omega initiative is pulling all our resources." Elena's heart gave a single, hard thump. Omega, the designation for high priority, multi-agency threats. Thorne was already turning. Distracted by the ringing phone on his desk, he picked it up. "Thorne, yes, I understand the frustration, Senator, but Omega's line on DeLorean is clear. We are way past money laundering. We are talking full-scale arms dealing. This is a national security file now." Elena froze. Her hand, which had been turning to leave, hung in the air. Thorne was looking at his computer, barking into the receiver, unaware of her presence. She was invisible. She backed away slowly, her footsteps silent on the government-grade carpet. She walked out of the building, the familiar weight of her badge gone, replaced by a new, heavier burden, the anonymous text message, the diner, the children, and now this. Omega. Arms dealing. She was in possession of classified, compromising information. By not speaking, by not telling Thorne. "I just met him. He had his children with him." She had crossed a line. The concrete ethical wall that had defined her entire career had just developed its first sickening crack. That evening, her phone rang. Not a text, but a call. The number was blocked, but she knew. She answered. "Elena." His voice was low, resonant, and it sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. "Hello, Luca." There was a pause, as if he was surprised she had answered, or perhaps that she had used his name so easily. "I wanted to apologize. For last night, the arrangement was unorthodox. It was not my intention to mislead you." Another smooth lie. "You were not misleading," she said, her voice cool. "You were assessing." A low chuckle. "Yes, that too. Allow me to apologize properly. Dinner tonight, a proper conversation. No architects, no pancakes." Her brain, her training, her very survival instinct screamed, "No, Omega, arms dealer, run." But the memory of his eyes, the weariness, and the impossible question from his daughter, "Will Daddy stop being sad?" echoed louder, where she heard herself say. The restaurant was called Ethelred's. It was on the 40th floor of a sleek, anonymous glass tower in Midtown that scraped the clouds. A private elevator opened directly into a room of dark wood, hushed carpets, and a single staggering wall of glass that looked out over the glittering diamond sprawl of Manhattan. It was a king's view. He was already there, at a corner table. He stood when she approached. He was not in the severe black overcoat. Tonight, he wore a tailored blue suit that made him look less like a shadow and more like a CEO, which, she supposed, he was. As she had entered the building, her old habits had kicked in. She had clocked the street, 3 black SUVs, parked in a no-standing zone, motors idling, drivers visible, his security. He was not just a man at dinner, he was a target. "Elena, you came." You are a hard man to say no to. Luca. The dinner was a careful dance. He was charming, insightful, and surprisingly open. He talked about the city, its architecture. He really had known the architect. It seemed, and its flaws. He spoke of it with the possessive love of a man who owned its secrets, but he spoke nothing of himself, nothing of his past, nothing of the girls. The candlelight softened the hard lines of his face, warming the shadows in his eyes. Elena found herself relaxing, her guard dropping in a way it had not with anyone in 5 years. She was talking, laughing, and the sound of her own laughter felt foreign. He refilled her wine glass, his fingers brushing hers. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt of heat through her. He leaned in, his voice dropping. "This city," he said, gesturing to the billion lights below them, "it is built on secrets." "And lies," Elena added, thinking of the FBI building. "And sometimes, hope." He held her gaze, his own impossibly deep. "Tell me, Elena, do you believe a bad man, a man who has done necessary, terrible things, can truly love someone?" The question hung between them, more intimate than a touch. She thought of the files. She thought of the text. Kills with a smile. "I do not know," she answered softly, her voice catching, "but I believe in people who regret." His expression changed, a flicker of something vulnerable, something raw, passed through his eyes before the mask snapped back into place. He nodded slowly. "Regret. Yes, I know that word." They left an hour later. The elevator ride down was silent, charged with the unspoken things. As they walked through the opulent, empty marble lobby toward the revolving doors, Luca gently placed a hand on the small of her back. The warmth of it seeped through her coat. He pushed the glass door for her. The cold night air hit her face. It happened in the space of a single breath. It was not a loud bang, but a series of sharp, dry cracks, the distinct, terrifying sound of suppressed gunfire. A star-shaped hole appeared in the plate glass window next to them. Before Elena could even process the threat, Luca moved. He was not a civilian. He was a predator, conditioned for violence. With a pained grunt, he shouted her name, a sharp, guttural command, and threw himself at her. He did not push her. He enveloped her. His body a solid wall, driving her down onto the cold pavement, shielding her completely. The world exploded in noise. Glass rained down from the canopy above them, shattering on the stone. More shots, louder this time. The whine of bullets ricocheting off the marble facade, shouts from his men, the roar of an engine. Elena was pressed against the concrete, her face against the rough wool of Luca's suit. She could feel his heart hammering against her, or perhaps it was her own. She smelled gunpowder and his cologne. Then it was over. Tires squealed, and the sounds of gunfire faded. His men were shouting, securing the area. "Are you hurt?" Luca's voice was a harsh rasp in her ear. "No, I am fine. Are you?" He tried to push himself up, to roll off her, and she heard him hiss, a sharp intake of breath that was pure agony. He collapsed back onto her for a second, his full weight pressing her down. "Luca." "I am fine," he lied. But she could feel it, a warm, wet sensation spreading rapidly through the fabric of his expensive suit, soaking her own clothes. She twisted, looking down at his side. In the chaotic blue and red lights of the arriving police cars, she saw it, a dark, spreading stain. He was bleeding. He was hit. He looked at her, his eyes blazing not just with pain, but with a cold, terrifying fury. In that instant, Elena understood. This was not a random street crime. This was an execution attempt. This was not a simple criminal she was with. He was a man at war, a man fighting for something far deeper, and he had just taken a bullet for her. "No hospital," Luca growled, the command sharp and absolute, cutting through the approaching sirens. His men were on them instantly. One, a man built like a refrigerator named Sal, already had the door of a black SUV open, his other hand inside his jacket. "Sir, the police are 2 blocks out. We have to move." "Her," Luca said. His eyes locked on Elena, his face pale and tight with pain. "We go with her. Her car." It was not a request, it was a tactical decision. Before Elena could form a protest, Sal had Luca's arm slung over his shoulder, half lifting him, moving with a speed that defied his size. "Your keys," the man grunted at her. The drive to her apartment near the Williamsburg Bridge was a surreal, high-speed nightmare. Her modest sedan was bracketed by the 3 black SUVs, a protective, illegal convoy that forced taxis and delivery trucks out of their path. They did not go to a hospital. They did not go to a fortified compound. They went to her 3rd-floor walk-up, the only sanctuary she could think of that was not already on a map of Luca's life. His men, Sal and another one who never spoke, swept her apartment in less than 30 seconds. They checked the fire escape, the single lock on her door, the windows. They pronounced it a tactical disaster, but temporarily necessary. Then, at a harsh, quiet command from Luca, they left. They did not go far. She saw them from her window, melting into the pre-dawn shadows of the street below, becoming part of the urban landscape, watching. She was alone with him. The apartment was silent. Save for the distant hum of the bridge, she flipped on a single, low-wattage lamp on her desk, keeping the rest of the room in shadow. The air was thick with the metallic smell of his blood and the cold night air clinging to his wool coat. His breathing was heavy, a slow, pained rhythm that seemed to pull all the oxygen from the room. He was slumped on her faded blue sofa, his head back, eyes closed. "Let me see it," she said. Her voice was not the voice of a woman on a date. It was the voice of Agent Brooks, the one who took control at a scene. She found her emergency first aid kit, the comprehensive one she still kept from her bureau days. He had shed his jacket, and the blue suit, soaked in blood, was ruined. She took her shears from the kit. "I have to cut the shirt." He nodded, a sharp, minimal movement. She cut the fine cotton, her movements practiced and impersonal. The bullet had torn a jagged path through the muscle and flesh along his left side. Just above his ribs, it was bleeding heavily, a dark, pulsing flow. She exhaled. It was bad, but it could have been worse. It looked like a through and through, missing the lung, missing the spine. "You are very lucky," she said, her voice clinical. "I do not feel lucky." She worked quickly, cleaning the wound with antiseptic. He hissed, his entire body going rigid as steel, but he made no other sound. She packed the wound, applying pressure, her hands firm. He watched her, his dark eyes intense in the low light, tracking her every movement. "You are good at this," he breathed, the words tight. "It was part of the job," she said, pulling a compression bandage tight around his torso. When she was finished, her hands were slick with his blood. She washed them in her kitchen sink, watching the red spiral down the drain. She felt strangely calm, the adrenaline fading and leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. She was harboring a fugitive. She was actively aiding and abetting the primary target of an Omega investigation. She sat on the wooden stool opposite the sofa, the silence stretched, heavy and raw. "You should have let them take me to one of my own places," he said, his voice rough. "And have them follow you," she countered, looking at her clean, trembling hands. "They knew who you were. They were waiting. They would have followed you, and they would have known I was with you. You took a bullet for me, Luca. Why?" He looked away, staring at the faint water stain on her ceiling. "They were not aiming for me. Not at first. They were aiming for you. To send a message. It was unexpected. For both of us." The admission settled between them. He had shielded her, not just from a stray bullet, but from a targeted hit. Why, she asked again. But the question was bigger this time. Not just about the bullet. Why the SUVs? The men on my street? The Omega file? Why this life? He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. "I was not always this," he said, his voice so low she had to lean forward. "I was an architect." Elena's head snapped up. The lie from the diner, the cover story. "It was not a lie," he said, as if reading her mind. "I designed buildings, glass and steel, things that were clean, things that would last. He turned his head on the sofa cushion, his eyes finding hers in the dim light. The pain she saw there was not from the wound in his side. It was ancient. Then my brother, Dante, was killed. He was young. He was reckless. He got involved with a crew running narcotics. Thought he was smarter than them. They killed him over a debt, left him in an alley. Elena watched him, her agent skepticism warring with her human intuition. She saw no deception, only a flat, cold landscape of grief. This was not a performance. This was a confession. I went to the police, Luca continued, his voice hardening, losing its softness. They filed a report. They called him a thug, said he got what he deserved. They did nothing. So I did something. I found the men who did it, and when I was finished, he took a shallow, pained breath. I discovered I had a choice. Go back to drawing blueprints for buildings, or take control of the entire structure that had failed my family, that had failed my brother. I never drew again. There was no other path. The story hung in the air, brutal and simple, an origin story. A man who had tried to find justice and had become a monster instead. Elena thought of Mark, of her own unsolved loss, and the girls she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Gianna and Sophia. Are they part of this? His expression, which had been granite, fractured. It was a profound, instantaneous shift, as if she had touched the only part of him that was not armored. They are not mine. She waited. They are not my blood, he clarified. The words costing him. A few years ago, I discovered one of my own capos was involved in a side business. Human trafficking. He was moving children through the ports. He crossed a line we do not cross. His voice was ice. I found them, the girls, in a shipping container. They were 4 years old. They were alone. They had no one. I rescued them. I ended the trafficking ring, and I ended the man responsible for it. He closed his eyes, as if the memory was a physical weight. They became my family. They are the only clean thing in my entire life. The breath left Elena's body, the cynical agent in her brain, the one screaming that this was all a perfectly curated sob story to gain her trust, was suddenly silent. It was silenced by the raw, undeniable truth of his voice. Her heart, the one she had encased in ice 5 years ago, gave a painful, terrifying lurch. It was not love as she had known it. It was something else, a tremor, a dangerous, seismic recognition of the man's brokenness, because it matched her own. She moved from the stool and knelt on the floor by the sofa, near his head. It was a violation of tactics, of basic sense. He saw the war in her face, slowly, wincing at the pull on his stitches. He lifted his uninjured hand. He did not reach for her. He did not try to touch her. He just offered his hand, palm up, in the space between them. A silent, vulnerable question. She looked at that hand. It was large, calloused, a hand that had designed buildings and, she had no doubt, taken lives. Elena placed her own hand in his. His fingers closed around hers. The grip was not possessive. It was anchoring. His gaze held hers, steady, sincere, and burning with a fire that was not anger or passion, but a raw, starving need to be seen. They did not kiss. They did not move. They just breathed in the quiet apartment, the space between them electric, a slow, agonizing burn of shared trauma and nascent, terrifying trust. Every labored breath he took felt like her own. They stayed that way for hours, the conversation fading into a shared, heavy silence. He eventually drifted into an exhausted, pained sleep, but his hand never loosened its grip on hers. Elena watched the dark blue of the night bleed into the pale, watery gray of dawn. The light crept through her blinds, painting stripes across the floor. She looked at the man on her sofa, Luca DeLoren, the head of a crime family, Omega's #1 target, a man who saved children and took bullets for strangers. As the first light hit his face, she acknowledged the impossible, horrifying truth. She had fallen in love with the one man in the world her entire life had trained her to destroy. The shooting at Ethelred's shattered the delicate truce between the city's underground factions. The Omega Task Force, smelling blood in the water, descended. The hunt for Luca DeLorean intensified from a priority to an obsession. He had vanished, and the failed public execution attempt had made him a ghost, a pariah, even in his own world. 3 days after the attack, Elena's phone rang. It was not a blocked number. It was the main switchboard of the Javits building. "Agent Thorne's office. The flat," administrative voice said. "He expects you in 1 hour." It was not a request. She walked back into the federal building, but this time, the chill she felt was not from the air conditioning. She was not a colleague. She was a person of interest. They did not meet in Thorne's office. He was waiting for her in a small, windowless interrogation room on the 24th floor. The air was stale. The fluorescent lights hummed, and the table was bolted to the floor. "Elena," Thorne began, his voice devoid of any of its old mentor-like warmth. He sat opposite her, his hands clasped. Another man, sharp-suited and with the dead calm eyes of a high-level prosecutor, stood in the corner. "Omega." "We have you on surveillance footage at Ethelred's," Thorne said, his voice flat. "We have you leaving the scene. You did not report the incident. You did not stay for the police. You left with the primary target." Elena kept her breathing even, her hands folded on the cold steel. She channeled every bit of civilian fear she had ever seen. "I was terrified. There was shooting. The man I was with, he got me out of there. He said he was taking me somewhere safe. I ran. I just ran." "You ran," the Omega agent in the corner said, his voice like sliding ice. "With Luca DeLorean, you took him to your apartment. You harbored him for 7 hours while his men secured the perimeter of your building. Then he left." "Where did he go?" "Miss Brooks." They had been watching her, not just Luca. The knowledge was a cold stone in her stomach. "I do not know," she lied. The word tasted like ash. "I did not know who he was. I swear, I was scared. He was hurt. He left. I have not heard from him since." Thorne stared at her, his eyes searching her face, looking for the agent he used to know. He saw only a mask. "You were one of the sharpest analysts I ever trained. Elena, do not throw your life away for a monster. You know what he is. He's an arms dealer. He's poison." "I am telling you what happened," she insisted, her voice breaking just enough. The lie was a chasm opening at her feet. On one side was the law, the system, everything she had believed in. On the other side was Luca. She had just chosen her side. The conflict was a physical sickness, a profound self-betrayal that made her want to weep. But her love for him, the memory of his confession, the impossible truth of the children, it was a stronger shield than any lie she had ever told. They let her go, but she knew she was marked. She was a suspect now, her life no longer her own. She walked for hours, trying to think, trying to outrun the gray sedan she knew was half a block behind her. She lost them, using old counter-surveillance routes, ducking through a hotel kitchen and exiting onto a different street. She was shaken, paranoid. Her instincts were screaming. She found herself back at the Luna Diner, drawn by the memory of where it had all begun. She sat in the same booth, the vinyl cracked in the same places. The night waitress, recognizing her, just poured her a coffee and left her alone. Elena stared at the cheap, framed painting of a field of flowers that hung on the wall. It was the same one she had stared at, bored and lonely, just over a week ago, a lifetime ago. It was crooked. She frowned. She had not noticed it before. It was just slightly off-kilter. A nagging feeling. The analyst in her waking up told her to fix it. She glanced at the counter. The diner was empty. She slid out, walked to the painting, and nudged it. It felt loose. Her heart began to hammer. She slipped her fingers behind the cheap wooden frame. There. A small square of folded paper, taped to the cardboard backing. She pulled it free. Her movements quick, concealed. She sat back down, her hands trembling. She opened the note under the table. It was his handwriting, strong and precise. "Trust me one time, or we both die." Below it was a single line of code, a series of letters and numbers that, to anyone else, would be meaningless. But to her, it was a key. It was a file path for an encrypted deep web dead drop server, an old black book system the FBI sometimes used for high-risk informants. He was not just asking for her trust, he was showing her his. He knew who she was, what she was capable of, and he was betting their lives on it. That night, she slipped out of her apartment via the fire escape, bypassing the surveillance on her front door, at a 24-hour internet cafe in Koreatown. She got to work, she buried her IP address, routed her signal through 3 continents, and accessed the server. The file was waiting. It was not a letter, it was a trove of data, shipping ledgers, offshore bank transfers, intercepted satellite calls, and a name she recognized, the Marcenaro Corporation. Luca's rivals, the legitimate face of the underworld, the ones who had supposedly gone clean decades ago. But the data told a different, horrifying story. The manifests were coded pharmaceuticals, textile, agricultural hardware. But the shipping routes, the tonnage, the shell corporations at the receiving end, it was not guns. It was human trafficking. Elena's blood ran cold. She kept digging, her analytical mind firing on all cylinders, the rust of 5 years of grief burning away. She found a separate file, a log. It detailed the Marcenaro operation, moving children from Eastern Europe into the United States, and then a single entry from 2 years prior, shipment 404, cargo compromised, L.D. interference. L.D. Luca DeLoren? It hit her with the force of a physical blow. Gianna and Sophia. They were from shipment 404. He had not just found them, he had taken them. He had intercepted a Marcenaro shipment and stolen their cargo. The entire picture reformed. Luca was not just a mafia boss, he was at war. He was fighting a system infinitely darker, more depraved than his own. The FBI, Omega, they were chasing him for arms dealing, while the Marcenaro Corporation, protected by lawyers and lobbyists, was selling human souls. She finally understood. He was not the monster. He was the man fighting the monster. She sat in the dark cafe, the glow of the screen illuminating her face. She had the proof to dismantle Marcenaro. She could take this to Thorne, be a hero, and save her career. But they would ask how she got it. They would trace the source. Luca's entire operation would be exposed. He would go to prison for life, and Marcenaro's high-priced lawyers would bury the evidence. Or she could give it to Luca. She could feed him the intelligence he needed to win his war, to burn his enemy to the ground. She closed the file. Her choice was made. Her loyalty was no longer to the law, which was blind, but to justice, which was not. She used a new burner phone to send a single, encrypted text, "I am in." Her love was no longer a simple emotion. It was an allegiance. It was a dangerous, two-front war, a game between the darkness and the law, and she knew, with terrifying certainty, that whoever betrayed the other first would lose everything. He sent a car for her, not a black SUV, but a nondescript gray sedan that blended with the afternoon traffic. The driver did not speak, just held a door open. The ride was long, over an hour, leaving the dense grid of the city, heading north along the Palisades. The car passed through a set of imposing, unmarked iron gates and up a long, winding drive, shielded by a thick forest of old-growth trees. The house was not a garish mansion. It was a severe, beautiful structure of dark stone and immense glass windows overlooking the Hudson River. It was less a home than a fortress, designed to watch the world from a safe, untouchable distance. Before the car had even come to a complete stop, the heavy front door burst open. "She is here," Gianna's voice, a high-pitched, excited shriek. Elena's door was pulled open, and she was suddenly, overwhelmingly embraced. Two small, warm bodies launched themselves at her. Gianna, in a blue dress, wrapped her arms around her neck, while Sophia, in matching red, clung to her waist. They were a tangle of limbs and happy, breathless giggles. You came, Sophia chanted into her coat. We knew you would. Elena, frozen for a second, wrapped her arms around them, the pure, uncomplicated warmth of their embrace, their absolute innocent trust in her, melted the last of the icy fear from her interrogation. This was real. This was the reason. She buried her face for a moment in Gianna's dark hair, breathing in the scent of kids' shampoo and something sweet, like apples. Across the gravel drive, Luca stood in the doorway. He was leaning against the stone frame, his left arm held stiffly against his bandaged side. He was not smiling. His face was a mask of profound, unshielded pain and something that looked terrifyingly like hope. He was watching the three of them, this impossible, ready-made family, with the eyes of a starving man looking at a feast he could not bring himself to touch. The dinner was a chaotic, happy affair in a kitchen large enough to be a restaurant. The girls insisted Elena sit between them. They ate simple roasted chicken and pasta, and the girls drank tall glasses of milk. They chatted about their day, their drawings, and a turtle named Sheldon that lived in a tank in their room. They were bright, loud, and blissfully normal. And all the while, Luca and Elena sat at opposite ends of the heavy oak table, locked in a silent, gravitational pull. Their eyes met over the tops of the children's heads. Their glances were no longer just assessing or wary. They were charged with their shared secret. I know what you are fighting. I know who you saved. His gaze was a question. Are you truly with me? Her answering look was a steady, unbreakable promise. I am. It was the most intimate and the most dangerous meal of her life. After the girls were finally, exhaustingly, put to bed, after 2 stories and 3 glasses of water, the house fell into a deep, protected silence. The only sound was the wind rising outside, rattling the immense windows. Come, Luca said, his voice quiet. He led her not to a living room, but through a set of glass doors onto a wide stone balcony. The air was cold, sharp, and carried the first hint of rain. The wind was fierce this high up, immediately whipping Elena's hair across her face. Below them, the Hudson was a ribbon of black glass. Across the river, the lights of Manhattan glittered, a distant, beautiful constellation. It looked like a city of hope, not the nest of secrets and violence they both knew it to be. He stood beside her, not touching, his hands braced on the stone railing. The wind snapped at the collar of his dark shirt. They love you, he said, his voice almost stolen by the wind. They are easy to love, Luca. He nodded, a slow movement, his gaze fixed on the skyline. This place. I designed it. Years ago, before, he did not need to specify. It was supposed to be a home, clean lines, a view of the world, but it became this, a safe house, a place to hide. It is still a home, she said softly. They are in there, sleeping. They are safe. You made it a home. He finally turned to look at her. His face was in shadow, but she could see the glint of his eyes, the tightness in his jaw from his healing wound. Nothing is safe. Elena, not for long. What you found, the Marcenaro data, it changes the game. They will not stop. They will tear this city apart to get to me. And now, to get to you. I am not afraid, she said, and was startled to find it was the truth. He let out a short, harsh breath that was almost a laugh. You should be. I am. He turned to her fully, the city lights at his back, casting him in silhouette. The first drops of rain, cold and hard, began to fall. If I die tomorrow, he said, his voice raw, stripped of all its authority, all its command, if they find me, if this all ends in blood and fire, at least I know I met you. At least I know they saw you. And I saw this. His words, a raw confession of his own mortality, his own fear, hung in the cold, wet air. She saw him not as the kingpin, not as the target, but as the man on her sofa, the man who had lost his brother, the man who had held her hand in the dark. She stepped closer, into his space, into the danger. The rain was coming down harder now, plastering her hair to her face. his shirt to his chest. "If you live," she answered, her voice trembling but fierce, "I will stay." His breath hitched. That was all it took. He moved. His hand, the one that was not calloused, the one that had held hers, came up. He did not grab her. He touched her face, his fingers gently brushing the rain-soaked hair from her cheek. His thumb stroked her skin, a touch so tender, so hesitant. It felt like an electric shock. It was a question, a plea. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, covering his hand with her own, her answer. He lowered his head. The first contact was not a kiss. It was a press of his forehead against hers, a sharing of breath, a desperate, silent acknowledgement. He was shaking, or maybe she was. And then he kissed her. It was slow, deep, and utterly shattering. It was not a kiss of seduction. It was a kiss of survival. It was the desperate, starving kiss of two people who had been alone for so long they had forgotten what it felt like to be touched, to be truly seen. It was all the unsaid words, all the shared grief, all the impossible, terrifying hope. His lips were soft, hesitant, then desperate, as if he was committing her to memory. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her hands tangling in his wet hair, pulling him closer. He groaned, a low, pained sound, and his uninjured arm crushed her to him, his hand splayed against the small of her back, holding her as if she were the only thing keeping him upright. It was a release, a dam of 5 years of loneliness breaking inside her. Tears tracked down her face, hot against the cold rain, mingling with the wetness on their lips. It was not gentle. It was raw, necessary, and absolute. It was the taste of the rain, the salt of her tears, and the undeniable, metallic hint of the blood he had shed for her. It was the kiss of two souls who had been waiting in the dark for a lifetime, finally breathing the same rhythm. They broke apart, gasping, their foreheads still touching. The wind howled around them, the rain soaking them to the bone, but they were in the eye of the storm. He was breathing hard, his eyes closed. She looked at him, really looked at him, in the flashing, distant light of the city. He was not a monster. He was not a file. He was hers. They stood under the dark, weeping sky, two shadows against the moonlit water, their fate sealed. It was a bond formed in violence, baptized in rain, and it was the only thing that felt true in a world of lies. The peace of the morning was a fragile illusion, shattered by the 7 a.m. light. Elena had barely slept, the feeling of the rain and the absolute commitment of their kiss having rewired her entire world. She was in the kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air, when the first explosion rocked the house. It was not a gunshot, it was a concussion, a deep, heavy blast from the perimeter wall. The stone floor shuddered. Before the alarm could even sound, Luca was in the doorway, his face not scared, but carved from ice. He was already moving. "They're here." His voice was a low command, cell status. The bodyguard's voice crackled over the house intercom, strained and desperate. "Sir, they're inside the grounds. They used explosives on the south gate. It is not the feds. It is Marcenaro. Full tactical assault." Luca grabbed Elena, pulling her toward the stairs. The girls. Now. They ran up the steps, and a second, louder explosion blew the heavy front doors off their hinges. The sound of automatic gunfire filled the lower floor, sharp and deafening. They burst into the children's room. Gianna and Sophia were sitting up in their beds, wide-eyed with terror. Luca did not pause. "It is a game," he said, his voice impossibly calm. "A very fast game of hide-and-seek. We have to go to the secret place." As he was pulling them from their beds, his personal cell, a dedicated, secure line, buzzed on his hip. He glanced at the screen, a single text. His body went rigid, a profound, sickening stillness that was worse than the gunfire. "What is it?" Elena asked, pulling a jacket onto Gianna. "The alert," he said, his voice hollow. "The security codes for the gate. They were not bypassed. They entered." He looked at her. his eyes a vortex of sudden, dark understanding. There was only one person besides me who had those codes. Who? Marco. The name landed like a death sentence. Marco, his right hand, the man who had been his brother's best friend, the man who had advised him for a decade, the man who had, just yesterday, assured him Marcenaro was retreating. The betrayal was absolute. Luca slammed his hand against the wall, a single, violent impact. "He sold us," he whispered. "He sold the children." Luca Elena pulled his focus back as the gunfire grew closer. He shook off the shock, his rage focusing into a diamond-hard point. He ran to the back of the children's closet, pushed aside a false panel, and revealed a heavy, reinforced steel door. He punched in a code. "The tunnel," he said, pulling it open to a dark, concrete tube. "It leads a quarter of a mile, under the riverbed, to the old boathouse. Go, take them." "Not without you," Elena said, her voice fierce. "I have to wipe the servers. They cannot get into my network." "There is no time," she yelled, pulling him. "Give it to me." He stared at her, the former FBI agent. He ripped the central hard drive from his desk tower and shoved it into her hands. "Elena, if they catch me." "They will not catch us," she said, and pulled him, with the girls, into the blackness of the tunnel, slamming the heavy door behind them. They ran, the only sound of their footsteps and the terrified, stifled sobs of the children in the damp, cold air. It felt like an eternity. They burst out of a rusted grate, hidden behind the crumbling stone of the boathouse. The air was cold, the morning sun obscured by fog. They were free for a second. A black sedan screeched onto the gravel path, but it was not Sal. It was a government vehicle. And then another, and another. Within seconds, they were surrounded, trapped against the river, the air filled with the slam of car doors and the metallic shing of weapons being drawn. FBI do not move hands in the air. Floodlights illuminated them, pinning them like insects. Luca instinctively pushed the girls behind him, shielding them with his body. Elena stood frozen, her blood turning to ice. She knew this protocol. She knew this formation. A figure stepped out of the blinding light, her FBI windbreaker flapping, her pistol held in a perfect, steady, two-handed grip. "Elena, step away from him, now." The voice was the most brutal betrayal of all. It was Clara, her best friend, the woman who had sent her on the blind date. Clara Elena's voice was a cracked whisper. The world tilted. "Clara, what is this?" "You have to listen. It is Marcenaro. He is attacking. He is trafficking." "Shut up!" Clara's voice was shaking, not with fear, but with a deep, personal rage. "I cannot believe you. We heard the assault call. We knew you were here. We've been watching you since you walked out of that interrogation. We know you are hiding him, sleeping with him." "Clara, you do not understand." "No, you do not understand." Clara took a step forward, her gun never wavering. "He is not just a criminal. He is a national target. Omega has him linked to arms deals that are destabilizing 3 countries. You have destroyed your life. You are an accomplice to treason." The choice was here, her past or her future, the law or justice. In her pocket, a small, encrypted radio Sal had given her crackled to life. Luca had the other one. His voice was a bare whisper, but it cut through the noise. "I trust you. Elena, whatever you do, I trust you." That was it. The final thread holding her to her old life snapped. She looked at Clara, her friend, her sister in the bureau. "You are right," Elena said, her voice clear and cold. She held up the hard drive. "I am an accomplice." Clara's face fell, her fury turning to shock. "Elena, no! Give me the drive!" "This drive," Elena said, "is not what you think. Marcenaro is the arms dealer. He's trafficking children, and he has an informant inside your Omega task force. You are not the hunter. Clara, you are the bait." "That is a lie. He's manipulating you." "Am I?" Elena took a step toward her. "Then why did Marcenaro attack at the exact same time you did? He knew. He knew you would come. He's using the FBI to kill his rival. You are cleaning up his mess." Clara hesitated, Her eyes darted to her second-in-command. She was rattled. In that second of doubt, Luca moved. He threw a concealed smoke grenade at the agent's feet. The world dissolved into gray, choking clouds. "Go, go!" Luca yelled, grabbing Sophia. Elena grabbed Gianna. They ran for the riverbank. "Do not fire! Do not fire!" Clara screamed in the smoke. They burst through the fog, onto the pier. It was a trap. The way was blocked by two more of Marcenaro's men. The chase was short. It ended on the Manhattan Bridge. Their stolen car was spun out, trapped in a pincer between a police blockade and two of Marcenaro's black SUVs. It was over. They were surrounded, sirens deafening, the rain beginning to fall. Elena was crouched in the back seat, laptop open, the hard drive connected. She was hacking, her fingers flying, using the data on the drive to bypass the Omega firewalls. "I'm almost in. Luca, I can find the informant." "We have no time," Luca said, looking at the tactical teams advancing. And then a new sound, a different siren, an ambulance, roaring up the bridge, driving against traffic. It did not stop. It accelerated, ramming the rear SUV, crushing it against the barrier in a spray of glass and steel. The side door of the ambulance flew open. Sal was in the driver's seat. And in the back, small and terrified but safe, were Gianna and Sophia. "Mommy, hurry," Gianna screamed, her voice a beacon in the chaos. It was the escape, the real escape. "Go." Luca shoved Elena. They ran, a desperate 20-yard dash, as Sal provided covering fire. They dove into the back of the ambulance. Elena looked back. Through the smoke, she saw Clara standing alone on the bridge. Her gun lowered, Elena had left the laptop on the pavement, its screen glowing with the proof. Clara was looking at it, the truth right at her feet. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and they plunged back into the city. The victory in the ambulance was brutally short-lived. Sal, loyal and efficient, drove them through the city's labyrinthine arteries for 2 days, moving between safe houses that were no longer safe. Marco's betrayal, they learned, was not a single act. He had systematically poisoned Luca's entire network, selling out locations, assets, and escape routes one by one. They were cornered in a nondescript warehouse in Red Hook. The assault, when it came, was not the FBI. It was Marcenaro's private army, backed by the full, corrupted power of the Omega agents Marco controlled. The firefight was a chaotic, concrete-shattering hell. Luca, his side wound torn open, was bleeding, weakening, but fighting with the ferocity of a cornered lion. Sal fell, covering their retreat to a sub-basement. They were trapped. "Elena," Luca said, his voice a strained rasp in the darkness, gunfire echoing above. He grabbed her face, his hands covered in grime and blood. "He wants me. He wants the girls. He only wants you dead because you are with me." He shoved them toward an old, rusted ventilation shaft. "Go. Live. Take them and live." "No, Luca. I will not leave you," she cried, clinging to him. He pushed her hard. "You must. They are your children now. They are our family." He kissed her. A desperate, bruising kiss that tasted of gunpowder and finality. "I will find you. I promise. Now go." He turned, picked up his last full magazine, and walked back toward the stairs to buy them time. Elena, her heart shattering, pushed the crying, terrified girls into the shaft and followed, crawling into the darkness. She heard his gun empty, the shouts, the return fire, and then a final, terrible, concussive grenade blast that was followed by silence. She and the girls emerged 3 blocks away, covered in filth. 2 small, weeping shadows led by a ghost. The news confirmed it that night. Luca DeLoren, wounded but alive, had been captured. He was in federal custody, held on a supermax prison barge, denied bail, facing charges of treason and domestic terrorism. Elena Brooks, the decorated former agent, was declared a fugitive, a co-conspirator. Her face was plastered across every news network, a narrative painting her as a corrupt, fallen woman, a traitor seduced by the very evil she had sworn to fight. She ran. With the emergency bag of cash and false identities Luca had given her, She became a ghost. They surfaced 3 months later in a rented cabin deep in the woods of northern Maine, a mile of unpaved road from the nearest town. The world shrank to a single room heated by a wood-burning stove. Elena was Anna. Gianna and Sophia were Grace and Jane. Life became a quiet, paranoid routine of survival. She taught them, not arithmetic, but how to read a compass, how to identify tracks in the snow, and how to be silent. She taught them to live off the grid, to fear strangers, to never ever say their real names. Her only contact with the outside world was a monthly 30-mile drive to a post office box in a different county. Luca, with his vast remaining influence, had established one last clean line of communication. The letters arrived in plain envelopes, supposedly from a defunct law firm. They were dry, technical notes about a pending property dispute. But she knew the code. It was an old bureau cipher, one she and Mark had used. 3rd letter, 5th word. She would decipher them by firelight, her heart in her throat, while the girls slept. I am alive. The wound is healing. They do not know what I know. Marcenaro is overconfident. They were lifelines, small scraps of hope in a world of ice. One night, a blizzard raged outside, the wind screaming against the small cabin, rattling the windows. The girls were huddled together on the small mattress, bundled in every blanket they owned. Elena had just returned from the post office, the trip taking 6 hours in the driving snow. She held the new letter, her fingers numb. She began the slow work of decryption. The weather is turning. They are moving me soon. The informant Clara found is high level. He's in the Justice Department. She is in danger. You must stay hidden. Elena's blood ran cold, but it was the last line that stopped her breath. The property lines are clear. The survey ends at the North Star. I will return then. She stared at the words, her vision blurring. The North Star. It was not a survey point. It was the name of the cafe she had told him about one night, the one she had dreamed of opening. The name of their impossible future. It was a message. It was a date. He was not waiting for a trial. He was planning to escape. She looked over at the sleeping girls. Gianna, in her sleep, turned and whispered, "Mommy? Cold?" Elena got up and tucked the blanket tighter around them, her entire body aching with a fierce, protective love that burned hotter than the stove. She was not an agent. She was not a fugitive. She was a mother. This was her family. She went to the window, pressing her hand against the frozen glass, looking out at the white chaos. "I will not let this love be buried," she swore, her voice a low, fierce promise to the storm. "I will not let your laws or your guns take my family." The storm broke by morning. The world was pristine, white, and dangerously silent. She was feeding the girls oatmeal when she saw it. Far down the access road, almost invisible against the snowdrifts, was a black government vehicle SUV, and then another. They had found her. The post office box must have been flagged. "Coats, boots, now," she said, her voice dropping into the old, cold command. "The game, the secret path, we have to go." Grabbing the emergency bag and her old service pistol, she pushed them out the back door and into the waist-deep snow of the forest. The woods were a frozen nightmare. They were not fast enough. The snow was too deep. She was carrying Sophia, dragging Gianna, but the children were small, cold and terrified. Behind them, she could hear the shouts, "FBI, stop, we have you surrounded." They were gaining. She could see their black tactical vests through the trees. She burst into a clearing, a high, wind-swept ridge overlooking a frozen lake. It was a dead end. She pushed the girls behind a granite boulder, shielding them, her lungs burning, her body failing. It was over. A new sound cut through the air, a deep, heavy thwop, thwop, thwop that vibrated in her chest. It was not the high whine of a police chopper. It was a deep-throated, military-grade sound. A large, black, unmarked helicopter rose over the treetops, fighting the wind. It hovered above the clearing, its downdraft a hurricane of snow, blinding her, blinding the agents below. The side door slid open. A figure, dark and broad, stood silhouetted against the gray sky. He was wrapped in a heavy parka. The helicopter descended, its skids touching the snow 10 yards away. The man jumped out. His boots sinking deep, he pulled down the thermal mask covering his face. It was Luca. His face was thinner, harder, and a new, pale scar ran from his temple to his jaw, but his eyes were the same, and they were locked on her. He was free, and he was surrounded by the blizzard. "Elena!" he roared over the sound of the rotors. "It is time to go home." The helicopter's cabin was a vortex of noise and swirling snow. Elena, pulling Gianna and Sophia into her lap, shielded them from the wind, her body a trembling, protective shell. Luca slammed the door shut, and the world outside vanished, replaced by the roar of the rotors and the sudden, suffocating intimacy of the small space. He tore off his parka, his movements economical and precise. He was not just an escaped prisoner, he was a commander. "There were loyalists," he said, his voice cutting through the noise as he checked the pilot, a man she did not recognize. "And you had a friend, Clara." Elena's head snapped up. "She got a message to me," Luca continued, his face grim. "After she saw the data you left, she dug. The Omega Task Force is compromised. The rot goes all the way up to the Justice Department. Marcenaro has been using the FBI as his personal hit squad, and he has been funding it with the arms deals he was making." He unzipped a heavy duffel bag and pulled out a ruggedized military laptop. "I have it all. The bank transfers, the name of the informant, the shipping manifests. He is moving his entire operation. Tonight." This was it, the final move, where Elena asked, her voice steady. "New Halden Port. He's shipping out the last of his weapons cache and, God help him, the last of his cargo. He's cleaning the house, erasing the evidence." "We have to stop him," Elena said. "No," Luca said, his eyes locking on hers, the new scar on his face pale against his skin. "We have to expose him. We hit him while he is moving. And we upload this." He tapped the laptop. "We do not just give it to the police. We give it to the world. We burn the entire system down." Their first stop was not the port. It was a forgotten, dilapidated pier on the East River, miles from the action. An old man, his face a map of wrinkles, emerged from a small watchman's hut, holding a lantern. "Pietro," Luca said, embracing the man. "Your father would be proud, boy, and angry," the old man rasped, his eyes kind. He looked at the girls. "They will be safe with me. No one has come here in 20 years. Luca knelt. He held Gianna's face, then Sophia's. "I have to go, to finish this. You stay with Pietro. You will be safe." "Are you coming back?" Sophia whispered, her hand clutching his. "I will always come back," he said, but his eyes, when he looked at Elena, were filled with the agony of a liar. He kissed them both, then pulled Elena aside. "Pietro is the only man on earth I trust, besides you. He was my father's friend. He will guard them with his life." Elena kissed her daughters, a hard, fast kiss on each forehead. "Be brave. We will see you soon." The New Halden port was a city of steel, a vast maze of shipping containers stacked like skyscrapers, lit by harsh, sodium yellow floodlights. A cold, driving rain swept in off the Atlantic, turning the asphalt into a black mirror. They moved through the shadows, a two-person army. He was the ghost, using his knowledge of the port's blind spots. She was the weapon, her FBI training fully engaged, her pistol held low and ready. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and the sea. Their target was the Central Operations Tower, the port's nerve center. It was the only place with a hardline connection fast enough to upload terabytes of data. They were compromised on the third-floor catwalk. Freeze, a voice yelled, "Not a cop, a Marcenaro mercenary," leveling an automatic rifle. Elena fired twice, a perfect, controlled pair of shots. The man fell. Alarms blared. The port exploded into chaos. "Go, go!" Luca yelled, pulling her toward the server room. They burst in. Luca threw himself at the main terminal, jamming a drive into the port, his fingers flying across the keyboard, bypassing firewalls. They are locked down. He knew. Elena stood at the door, her back to him, her gun up. She heard the thud of boots on the metal stairs. They are coming. Luca, how much time? 5 minutes, maybe less. The door flew open. 3 men. Elena shot one, ducked behind the server rack as bullets chewed the metal. Sparks flying. She fired again, hitting a second, the third, a man in a tactical vest. Got a shot off. It was not a sharp crack, it was a sledgehammer. A white-hot, tearing pain exploded in her abdomen. She gasped, the air punched from her lungs, and staggered back, her leg giving out. Elena Luca's voice was a roar of terror. She fell, slumping against the server rack, her back to him. She could feel the warm, wet rush of blood. Keep working, she gasped. The words choked. She raised her pistol, her hand shaking, and fired twice more at the doorway. It is done. The upload is ready. Luca was at her side, his hands hovering over her, his face a mask of horror. No, she breathed. Her own laptop, which she had wired to the mainframe as a redundant link, was on the floor. The final key. It is on mine. Outside, the air filled with the deafening wail of sirens. Not just one, 100. The port was being swarmed. Blue and red lights pulsed through the rain, reflecting off the wet steel. Elena crawled, dragging her leg, every movement an agony. She reached her laptop. Her hand, covered in her own blood, found the enter key. She pressed it. On the terminal, the progress bar flashed upload complete, broadcasting. All over the port, massive external monitors, meant for shipping crews, flickered to life. They were not showing manifests. They were showing bank accounts. They were showing the face of the Justice Department informant. They were showing photos of the trafficked children. The data was streaming to every news network, every police precinct, every federal agency. The war was over. Luca grabbed her, pulling her into his lap, his hand pressing desperately against the bleeding wound. The door burst open again. This time, it was the NYPD, guns raised, freeze hands up. They were standing back to back, even now, him, shielding her with his body, her slumped against him, her blood soaking them both. The room was thick with smoke, the air ringing with sirens. Luca looked down at her. Her face was ashen, her breathing shallow. He kissed her forehead, his lips trembling against her cold skin. "You are the light," he whispered, his voice thick with tears. "You are the light in my entire dark world. Stay with me, please, Elena, stay with me." He saw them. Through the open door, past the police. He saw Pietro, holding Gianna and Sofia by the hands, safe behind the police line. They were crying, but they were alive. He looked at the guns pointed at him. He looked at Elena, dying in his arms. He had one last move, one last sacrifice. Gently, as if she were made of glass, he laid her on the floor. He stood up slowly, raising his hands, his face a mask of agonizing surrender. "She needs a doctor," he said, his voice broken but clear. "Now. She is a federal agent. She was injured. It is over. I am the one you want." Elena, her vision tunneling, reached a weak hand out. "No, Luca." She watched, helpless, as they swarmed him, forcing him to his knees, his hands cuffed behind his back. He was not fighting. He was staring at her. He was being cuffed, pulled to his feet. As they dragged him out, he turned, his gaze finding hers, locking with it, holding it across the chaos. It was a promise. It was a goodbye. It was everything. Elena screamed, a thin, raw sound lost in the noise, as he was pulled from her sight. 1 year later, the air in the small Oregon coastal town did not smell of gunpowder or exhaust. It smelled of salt, pine, and the constant damp mist that rolled in from the Pacific. The violence of New York, the sirens, the concrete and steel, felt like a story from a different century, a life belonging to someone else. Elena was no longer Agent Brooks, nor was she the fugitive Anna. She was just Elena. She had survived. The wound in her abdomen, which had taken months of painful, secret recovery, was now a pale, silver scar, a reminder of the price of their freedom. She owned a small cafe on the town's single main street. The sign, hanging from a driftwood post, was painted in simple white letters, North Star. It was the name she had whispered to him in the dark, their symbol of an impossible future. The cafe was warm, filled with mismatched furniture, the scent of fresh ground coffee beans and cinnamon. It was a sanctuary. Gianna and Sophia were thriving. They were 7, almost 8 years old, and the haunted, watchful expressions they had worn were gone. They were just children now, loud and bright, their laughter filling the small apartment above the cafe. They went to the local school, and in the afternoons, they would do their homework at the cafe's front window, arguing over crayons. Every night after the last customer had left and Elena had locked the door, they had a ritual. "Tell us about him, Mommy," Gianna would ask, her head resting on her arms at the counter. "Tell us about our dad." Elena would pause, her hands busy wiping down the chrome espresso machine, the one she had bought with the last of Luca's emergency money. "He is the bravest man I have ever known," she would say, her voice soft and steady, the words a familiar prayer. "He taught us that you must always fight for your family, no matter what. And he taught us that even when the world is very dark, you must never be afraid of the shadows." It was a Tuesday, just after 4 in the afternoon. A heavy, gray rain was misting the windows, and the cafe was empty. Elena was at the register, counting the day's small earnings. The girls were coloring at their usual table by the window, a quiet, domestic scene that felt stolen, precious. The brass bell above the door chimed, a bright, clear sound against the quiet hiss of the rain. Elena looked up, a polite, practiced smile on her face. "Welcome to the North Star. I will be with you in just a—" The words evaporated in her throat. A man was standing on the welcome mat, shaking the rain from the collar of a simple, dark coat. The weak afternoon light from the window cast him in shadow, but she did not need to see his face. She knew the breadth of his shoulders. She knew the way he held himself. He stepped forward, into the warm light of the cafe. He was thinner than she remembered, his face harder, etched with lines of exhaustion. And there, stark and pale against his cheek, was a new scar, a jagged line from his temple to his jaw, a relic of the prison he had escaped. He was free, and he was here. Sophia looked up from her drawing. Her crayon, a bright red one, dropped from her hand and rolled onto the floor. Her eyes, so like his, went wide. For one, silent, agonizing second, the world stopped breathing. "Daddy," she whispered, the word a question, a miracle. Then it was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Daddy!" Both girls scrambled from their chairs, their stools clattering to the floor. They launched themselves across the small room and crashed into his legs, their arms wrapping around him in a desperate, ecstatic tangle. Luca fell to his knees, a raw, choked sound torn from his chest. He did not care that he was wet or that they were knocking him off balance. He wrapped his arms around them, crushing them to him, burying his face in their hair. His entire body shook with the force of his sobs. Elena stood paralyzed behind the counter, her hand pressed against her mouth. This was the moment she had both prayed for and given up on. He was a ghost, a memory, a story she told her children. And now he was here, solid and real, holding their daughters. The tears she had held back for an entire year began to fall, hot and silent. After a long minute, Luca looked up, his eyes, still fierce, still dark, finding hers over the heads of his children. He stood slowly, the girls still clinging to his legs like small, precious anchors. He walked toward her, each step closing the impossible distance, the year of agony. He stopped on the other side of the counter, the last barrier between them. "I am back, Elena," he said, his voice rough, broken, and full of a profound promise. "I came back just like I told you." She did not know how she moved. She was not aware of walking around the counter. She was just suddenly, finally in his arms. His one free arm wrapped around her, pulling her against him, and he held her, his hand tangling in her hair. The kiss was not the desperate, rain-soaked clash on the balcony. It was not the final, bloody goodbye. It was quiet. It was deep. It was a soul finding its harbor. It held the taste of salt from the ocean and from her tears, and the simple, clean scent of the rain. It was not survival. It was arrival. It was two broken halves of a life finally, agonizingly made whole. As they stood there, a family reunited in the middle of the empty cafe, the small television in the corner, which had been muttering the local news, broke in with a national report. The anchor's voice was crisp. "Tonight marks the final collapse of the Marcenero Corporation, as federal prosecutors unsealed the last of the indictments. Following the damning evidence first broadcast a year ago, the Omega Task Force has been permanently disbanded with 3 of its top officials, including a high-ranking Justice Department informant, sentenced on charges of corruption and conspiracy. The war was over. The world they had burned to the ground was gone." Later, as the sun broke through the clouds, painting the sky in fiery shades of purple and gold, the 4 of them walked on the beach. The sand was wet and cold under their bare feet. Gianna and Sophia, giddy with joy, were running ahead, chasing the receding waves, their laughter carried back on the wind. Elena and Luca walked behind, his hand holding hers, their fingers laced together. He was here. He was real. Gianna, breathless and her face pink from the cold, ran back to them, tugging on Elena's hand. "Mommy," she asked, her voice suddenly serious in the twilight, "are we a real family now?" Elena stopped, her heart too full to speak. She smiled, the tears returning, and she looked from Gianna's earnest face to Sophia, who was dancing in the surf, and then up to Luca. He was watching her, his love for her, for them, an open, unshielded light in his eyes. She knelt in the sand, pulling her daughter into a tight hug. "We were always a real family, my love," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "From the very second you walked into that diner." Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to Mafia Boss Story, give this video a like, and support us by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.